Hey guys, and welcome to Limited Review Week here on the Need to Hone Magic channel. I'm Need to Hone, and for the next week, I will be posting a video every single day discussing Shadows of Innistrad as a limited format. This is something I do every time a new set comes out. As usual, I'm starting with my assessment of the best commons and uncommons in each color, and today we're looking at white. The next 4 consecutive days will be the other colors, and then after that, I do some more limited discussion. These reviews are helpful of the best commons and uncommons because they're going to make up the bulk of any deck in limited, and so you can do a good job of sort of judging what colors are the best based on who has the best commons and uncommons. It is important to keep in mind that these are my initial impressions of the cards, and having not played the format as no one else has, it's not going to be a perfect list, but these are my initial impressions based on a lot of experience drafting throughout the years. So let's go ahead and get started, and we will look at what I think is the best white uncommon, and probably isn't a very contentious one, I wouldn't think, and that is Bound by Moonsilver. This card is sort of like Pacifism, a card that is always good and limited, but it does cost 1 extra. But the additional lines of text it has on it make it absolutely worth it. First of all, it doesn't let creatures transform, and this is relevant because some creatures have powerful abilities when they transform, and this card can stop that from happening. There are, the legendary Avacyn that they printed. If she's still able to flip, can create huge problems for you because she can nuke your board. Things like that. It can stop any kind of transformation. On top of that, though, I think the more important line of text is the fact that it has the ability to move the aura between multiple creatures. One of the downsides about enchantments like Pacifism or any other enchantment spell that's a removal spell is that sometimes you have to play it to stop a problem creature a little earlier than you would want to. It's your only card with your removal card in your hand, but you just have to stop your opponent's, let's say, 4/4, because your board just can't stand up to it. But then, if your opponent drops some major bomb, you're like always disappointed because you wish you'd held on to your Pacifism to a degree. And this card lets you get around that. And the cost for it is actually, there's no mana involved, so you can just do it whenever, which is pretty nice. And the cost for it, though, isn't that steep. It has you sacrifice a permanent, which means you can sacrifice lands, which sometimes is what you're going to want to do probably in the late game. But this set also has the presence of clues, these little artifact tokens that come into play, and you can pay 2 to sacrifice them to draw a card. And white has some of the most cards that produce clue tokens. So being able to sacrifice a clue to move this from one problem creature to another, after your board develops and you can deal with the first one easily, is pretty great. And this is a card I think I would take first pick in a lot of packs, that don't have a very good rare in it or another one of the really good uncommons. And it's basically, if you're in white already, you should never pass Bound by Moonsilver. That's that strong of a card. So this card, I think, is far and away the best uncommon in white, but I do have one honorable mention of a card that I want to mention that I think is a pretty strong uncommon in white, and that is Untitled Chaplain. This guy's pretty great, I think, but obviously not as good as Bound by Moonsilver. While I mentioned that I envision myself taking several Bound by Moonsilver's first pick, I think I will only be picking this as the first pick in fairly weak pack. But that said, he is very good. He doesn't pass the vanilla test by any means. He doesn't look good there. 4 mana 3/1 is, a big F as far as the vanilla test goes. However, the other stuff that he can bring makes the investment very much worth it. The fact that he has lifelink is relevant. He's going to gain you life. Even if you have to trade with another guy or just chump block something, you get to gain life. And life gain is always a problem in racing an opponent. And this is also a card your opponent oftentimes isn't going to want to block unless they absolutely have to, because he's sort of a walking 2-for-1, even a 3-for-1 sometimes. After he dies and goes in your graveyard, you can then pay 2 and a white to exile him and put 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. So he goes from being a 3/1 with lifelink, who's already sort of relevant and can trade with a lot of things. And it's definitely not a good trade for your opponent if you're trading with your Untitled Chaplain, because then you get a bunch of spirit tokens. And I think that's a really powerful ability. It's even more powerful in a format where graveyards are very much relevant. If this guy gets milled by you or you discard him for one reason or another, you can still get value out of him once he's in your graveyard by giving you a couple of spirit tokens. And I think that makes this card really strong. 2-for-1s are always pretty good. All right, so that does it for my best uncommon and my sort of honorable mention. So it's basically the second best uncommon. Now we'll move on to the commons. Number 3, I have Puncturing Light. This card is very conditional removal. It has 2 conditions. First of all, creature has to be attacking or blocking, and it has to have power 3 or less. We just recently had Searing Light, and it was a pretty underwhelming card. It didn't make it on my list of best commons back in the review for Oath of the Gatewatch, but I did think it was going to be better than it was, and most of the time it's just not that good. But I think this is efficient enough, just like Searing Light was, unfortunately. But it can hit a lot more creatures. 3 power is a lot more than 2, if you didn't know. You know, it is just 1 more than 2, but I think this card is strong enough that you will be happy to play it. Most limited, I mean, you probably don't want more than 1 copy in most decks. These kinds of effects are always easy for your opponent to play around. But one way of illustrating that power 2 or less versus power 3 or less has a pretty big gap is the fact that they printed Defeat a few sets ago, which could kill a creature with power 2 or greater. And then in Battle for Zendikar, they've printed Complete Disregard, which costs 1 more mana than Defeat did, and it was an instant, which is a big deal. And it could exile creatures with power 3 or greater, 3 or less rather, just like this can. I mean, this is not on the level of Complete Disregard, don't get me wrong. I'm just sort of trying to tell you why it is I think this is good after sort of a bust like Searing Light. All right, so I think that's the 3rd best common. At the 2nd best common, I think, is Dauntless Cathar. He's very similar to the uncommon I just mentioned earlier, Near Heath Captain. I keep wanting to say Near Hearth because Near Heath sounds weird. This guy, you know, passes the vanilla test just barely as a 3-mana 3/2. I mean, he may even do a little more than just barely passing it. But on top of that, though, he has an ability that can also cause your opponent to have, you know, issues. Gives you a 2-for-1 and gives you an evasive threat. You can exile him from your graveyard, just like you could his big brother, the Near Heath Captain, and you get a 1/1 Spirit token with flying. That means also, like Near Heath Captain, he has the upside of if he gets milled, if you discard him, any of these things, you can then get at least a little value out of him. It is important to note that both of them can only do it at sorcery speed, otherwise it'd be even better, but I still think they're both pretty solid cards. So the number 1 pick I have for the best white common in Shadows Over Innistrad is Angelic Purge. This card has been somewhat contentious on social media, where I've seen people sort of debating it in general. Some think the card's very good, and others are downplaying it. The people who downplay it compare it to Bone Splinters, which is a card that is certainly not great, and you don't want to play most of the time unless you're in some sort of token strategy. Bone Splinters is a card that's 1 black, sacrifice a creature, destroy target creature. But I think Angelic Purge is considerably better than Bone Splinter is, for a few reasons. Angelic Purge can hit more than just creatures. It can hit artifacts or enchantments, which is somewhat relevant in this format. There is a cycle of enchantments that are all pretty solid. I wouldn't say they're all strong, but they're all playable-ish. And there's also artifacts running around in this format. There's sort of an equipment sub-theme going on in the format, and you can destroy those if you need to. On top of that, though, you don't have to sacrifice a creature with Angelic Purge. It's sacrifice a permanent, which again makes it way better than Bone Splinters. In the late game, you can pay 3 and sack a land to kill their huge bomb, something you're going to want to always do. And again, like I mentioned a moment ago, the presence of clues in this format makes sacrificing permanents less of a problem than it usually is. And again, white has a lot of ways to make clues, and so you can have your Angelic Purge. Sacrifice your clue and exile whatever their biggest creature is. I mean, sometimes it's also Bone Splinters if you're in certain situations where you need your lands or whatever, but still you're giving up your worst card to kill their best card. But most of the time, I think it's more ideal to go with a land or a clue token, especially. If it's a clue token, you're not getting 2-for-1 at all. If it's a land, you're sort of getting 2-for-1. So I think that Angelic Purge is very good. I think it's a card that you probably don't want like 4 of. It's no like Oblivion Strike, which you just had recently that you would play every copy of possibly if you had it. But Angelic Purge is still a good one to, maybe probably 2 cards in your deck. You're pretty happy with it. And it's a card that has a lot of synergy, as I mentioned, with clue decks, which is going to kind of be a thing in this format. The more cards you have with Investigate, the better Angelic Purge will get. I do have one honorable mention that I wanted to bring up for best commons in white, and it's not the most exciting card ever, but that's part of why I think it's worth mentioning, because I think it's going to be a little better than most people are thinking it will be, and that is, as you can see here, Moorland Drifter. It's certainly not something that's overly exciting, But the thing I like about it is that it's a 2 mana 2/2. Obviously, decks always want 2 mana 2/2s. But on top of that, it's a card that can improve the later the game goes on, and you don't have to invest anything into it. Eventually, it'll just gain flying, assuming your deck has ways of hitting Delirium, which they've given us a lot of ways to do based on looking over the set this morning. And so he'll become a threat in the later game in the air after in the early game being a good 2-drop that, creates problems. You can threaten to trade, you can be swinging with it, you can do all sorts of things. And I definitely don't think it's the most exciting card ever, but I do think it's a pretty solid common that you'll probably want to play fairly frequently. And it's also worth mentioning, by the way, that it's a spirit, and the blue-white deck has a lot of spirit synergies. Anyway, that is my review of the best commons and uncommons in white. I'll be doing another one of these videos every day until the day of the pre-release. So I hope you'll enjoy those. And thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.